Lassie Farm, episode 3 of the Arabian Nights, the merchant and the demon, from where we left off. It is related, O happy king, that the first old man with the deer approached the demon and, kissing his hands and feet, said, "Friend and king of the demon kings, if I tell you what happened to me and that deer, and you find it strange and amazing, indeed stranger and more amazing than what happened to you and the merchant, will you grant me a third of your claim on him for his crime and guilt?" The demon replied, "I will." Then the old man said, "Demon, this deer is my first cousin, my flesh and blood. I married her when I was very young, she a girl of 12 who reached her womanhood only afterward. For 30 years we lived together, but I was not blessed with children, for she bore neither boy nor girl. Yet I continued to be kind to her, to care for her, and to treat her generously. Then I took a mistress, and she bore me a son who grew up to look like a slice of the moon. Meanwhile, my wife grew jealous of my mistress and my son. One day, when he was 10, I had to go on a journey. I entrusted my wife, this one here, with my mistress and son, bade her take good care of them, and was gone for a whole year. In my absence, my wife, this cousin of mine, learned soothsaying and magic, and cast a spell on my son and turned him into a young bull. Then she summoned my shepherd, gave my son to him, and said, "Tend this bull with the rest of the cattle." The shepherd took him and tended him for a while. Then she cast a spell on the mother, turning her into a cow, and gave her also to the shepherd. Excuse me. When I came back, after all this was done, and inquired about my mistress and son, she answered, "Your mistress died, and your son ran away 2 months ago, and I have had no news from him ever since. When I heard her, I grieved for my mistress, and with an anguished heart I mourned for my son for nearly a year. When the great feast of the immolation drew near, I summoned the shepherd and ordered him to bring me a fat cow for the sacrifice. The cow he brought me was in reality my enchanted mistress. When I bound her and pressed against her to cut her throat, she wept and cried as if saying, my son," and her tears coursed down her cheeks. Astonished and seized with pity, I turned away and asked the shepherd to bring me a different cow. But my wife shouted, "Go on, butcher her, for he has none better or fatter. Let us enjoy her meat at feast time." I approached the cow, and again she cried as if saying, my son." Then I turned away from her and said to the shepherd, "Butcher her for me." The shepherd butchered her, and when he skinned her, he found neither meat nor fat, but only skin and bone. I regretted having butchered her and said to the shepherd, "Take her for yourself, or give her as alms to whoever you wish, and find me a fat young bull from among the flock." The shepherd took her away and disappeared, and I never knew what he did with her. Then he brought me my son, my heart blood, in the guise of a fat young bull. When my son saw me, he shook his head loose from the rope, ran toward me, and throwing himself at my feet, kept rubbing his head against me. I was astonished and touched with sympathy, pity, and mercy, for the blood hearkened to the blood and the divine bond, and my heart throbbed within me when I saw the tears coursing over the cheeks of my son, the young bull, as he dug the earth with his hooves. I turned away and said to the shepherd, Let him go with the rest of the flock and be kind to him, for I've decided to spare him. Bring me another one instead of him." My wife, this very deer, shouted, "You shall sacrifice none but this bull." I got angry and replied, "I listened to you and butchered the cow uselessly. I will not listen to you and kill this bull, for I have decided to spare him." But she pressed me, saying, "You must butcher the bull." And I bound him and took the knife. I took the knife and I turned to slaughter the bull. He wept, bellowed, rolled at my feet, and motioned toward me with his tongue. I suspected something, began to waver with trepidation and pity, and finally released him, saying to my wife, "I have decided to spare him, and I commit him to your care." Then I tried to appease and please my wife, this very deer, by slaughtering another bull, promising her to slaughter this one next season. We slept that night, and when God's dawn broke, the shepherd came to me without letting my wife know and said, "Give me credit for bringing you good news." I replied, "Tell me, and the credit is yours." He said, "Master, I have a daughter who is fond of soothsaying and magic, and who is adept at the art of oaths and spells. Yesterday I took home with me the bull you had spared to let him graze with the cattle, and when my daughter saw him, she laughed and cried at the same time. When I asked her why, she answered that she laughed because the bull was in reality the son of our master, the cattle owner, put under a spell by his stepmother, and that she cried because his father had slaughtered the son's mother. I could hardly wait till daybreak to bring you the good news about your son." Demon, when I heard that, I uttered a cry and fainted. And when I came to myself, I accompanied the shepherd to his home, went to my son, and threw myself at him, kissing him and crying. He turned his head toward me, tears coursing over his cheeks, as if to say, "Look at my plight." Then I turned to the shepherd's daughter and asked, "Can you release him from the spell? If you do, I will give you all my cattle and all my possessions." She smiled and replied, "Master, I have no desire for your wealth, cattle, or possessions. I will deliver him, but on two conditions. First, that you let me marry him. Second, that you let me cast a spell on her who had cast the spell on him, in order to control her and guard against her evil power." I replied, Do whatever you wish and more. My possessions are for you and my son. As for my wife, who has done this to my son and made me slaughter his mother, her life is forfeit to you." She said, "No, but I will let her taste what she has inflicted on others." Then the shepherd's daughter filled a bowl with water, uttered an incantation and an oath, and said to my son, "Bull, if you have been created in this image by the all-conquering Almighty Lord, stay as you are. But if you have been treacherously put under a spell, change back to your human form by the will of God, creator of the wide world." Then she sprinkled him with the water, and he shook himself and changed from a bull back to his human form. As I rushed to him, I fainted, and when I came to myself, he told me what my wife, this very deer, had done to him and to his mother. I said to him, "Son, God has sent us someone who will pay her back for what you and your mother and I have suffered at her hands." Then, O demon, I gave my son in marriage to the shepherd's daughter, who turned my wife into this very deer, saying to me, "To me this is a pretty form, for she will be with us day and night, and it is better to turn her into a pretty deer than to suffer her sinister looks." Thus she stayed with us, while the days and nights followed one another, and the months and years went by. Then one day the shepherd's daughter died, and my son went to the country of this very man with whom you have had your encounter. Sometime later, I took my wife, this very deer, with me to set out to find what happened to my son, and I chanced to stop here. This is my story, my strange and amazing story. The demon assented, saying, I grant you 1/3 of this man's life. Then, O king, the second old man with the 2 black dogs approached the demon and said, I too shall tell you what happened to me and these 2 dogs. And if I tell it to you and you find it stranger and more amazing than this man's story, will you grant me 1/3 of this man's life? The demon replied, I will. Then the old man began to tell his story. And we'll leave it there.